Hello and welcome to the Premier Safety Podcast. I am your host, Jeff Freeman, and this is where we discuss most everything industrial safety. On today's episode, we have our very special guest, Nate Bohmbach from Ergodyne Corporation. Welcome, Nate.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeff.
On today's episode, we are going to discuss the evolution of dropped objects prevention. But before we get to that, Nate, I'd like to ask you, tell us a little bit about your background and with Ergodyne Corporation.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I've been in the safety industry since 2007.
Mhm.
Started off in the fall protection arena, worked for one of the biggest fall protection companies in the country, and then came over to Ergodyne in 2011, where we focused heavily on dropped objects prevention amongst our other 13 product categories here at Ergodyne. We're based in Minnesota.
Mhm.
I've been happy to be in the industry now for going on nearly 13, 14 years or so.
Wow.
And it's super great. Love it, and happy to be here.
All right. Well, thank you. And that's great that you have such a background in this. And that is where we're going to get started with. On this particular episode, we're going to, like, as I said, we're going to be talking about the evolution of dropped objects prevention. And tell us a little bit, Nate. We'll start off with saying, how is it viewed in 2021 as compared to, say, 10, 20, or even 50 years ago?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, going on 100 years ago, even, you think back to, well, of course, nobody was here, but when gravity was first discovered. So
Mhm.
it's not an issue that's just come up recently in the safety world. Stuff's been falling on people for ages, since the beginning of
Mhm.
time, of course. But right around when the Hoover Dam was built, people first invented the hard hat, right? Because things were falling and the workers themselves discovered they needed a solution.
Right.
So they were dipping ball caps in tar, letting them harden, and
Really?
yeah, definitely, and putting them on. Not very comfortable. Couldn't have been
No.
very comfortable, but they knew that was an issue because people were getting hit. Fast forward to in the 90s and such, the oil and gas industry recognized there's a better way to do it, and they started tying their tools off with twine, duct tape, and such. And thus the tool lanyard was invented. But it didn't really rocket up people's safety boards and safety concerns until 2014, when this guy in New Jersey fell 50 stories, skipped off of an I-beam. This is a tape measure, by the way. Don't know if the audience can
Oh,
see it,
wow.
but uh, ricocheted off an I-beam and shot outside of a perimeter on a job site and struck a delivery driver in the head.
Mm.
And unfortunately, that delivery driver didn't make it. And that particular story got national attention. That even People magazine picked it up. And so when that happened in 2014, that's when people recognized this is an issue on our job site. And that's when dropped object prevention, not just protection, really came to light, and people started discovering they can tie these things off. And it's a better practice than simply wearing hard hats, because it doesn't prevent things from falling. So now, sitting here in 2021, pretty soon 2022, it's a serious safety discussion on job sites in multiple different industries.
No, I imagine so. And also, and you mentioned about that perimeter around the, say, talking about like a tall building being constructed in a
Right.
downtown area. You
Hmm.
have that perimeter around to keep out the public. But as you just mentioned, something can happen where it deflects and goes outside of that perimeter. And now it's
Absolutely.
injuring somebody who is not wearing a hard hat or just a passerby or something. So, yeah,
Definitely.
that
Yep.
really shows how important it is. Now, in comparison to fall protection, how is this similar? And also going on, how is it different?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because it usually gets grouped in the discussion with fall protection.
Mhm.
And of course, it's similar in the fact that you're trying to prevent people and objects from falling, right? So there's a lot of similarity in terms of that. There's also similarity in the systematic discussion there, where you need something to wrap around the tool or the person. You need an anchor point to connect to, and then you need something between the anchor point and the person to connect them.
Right.
So the system of it is very similar. Now, what's different is that tools and people, they're completely different, and the person is on opposite ends of the system. And I'll tell you what I mean by that.
Mhm.
So the person in fall protection is on the end of the system, meaning if they fall in this situation, they're dangling and need to be rescued.
Right.
In a dropped object scenario, 90+% of the time, that person is the anchor point and you're tying that tool off to the person.
Right.
So that's a huge difference. And you get into things like energy absorption in the lanyards and
Mhm.
stuff like that we can talk about later. A couple other key differences is just the sheer amount of tools and equipment that need to be tied off.
Oh,
These
absolutely.
things these things range from pieces of hardware, that are a fraction of a pound, all the way up to huge power tools and equipment that could fall. And not to oversimplify fall protection, but Jeff, you and I could wear the same harness. Most people can wear the same harness,
Mhm.
just with a different size.
Right.
So there's not one universal harness that fits all these tools and equipment.
Yep.
So that makes it super challenging. And there's various other different challenges as well, that makes it a difficult discussion. And even though it should be grouped together in terms of at height safety,
Mhm.
there are some key differences to talk about between the two.
Oh, absolutely, and I can see what you mean by that because you take something as simple as a wrench, being able to tie that off with something that would just wrap around its middle section of a you're talking about like a box end wrench
Right.
versus an actual heavy drill or something. And
Right.
also in the use of those things, you want to make sure that they're not attached in such a way that's going to make it difficult for that tool to be used.
Uh,
I mean, that
uh,
has to go into play as well, I would imagine.
that's one of the biggest challenges when
Mhm.
we innovate and come out with new products is we're daily we're getting an email or a phone call from one of our end users is, Nate, have you seen, do you know how to tie this off?
Mm.
And we get challenged every day, and it makes the job pretty fun, actually, to come
I
up
would
with these
imagine.
solutions.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest challenges is these tools and equipment, a grinder, for example, right?
Mhm.
uh, these power tools, they have critical information on it that you need to see and inspect, so you can't just wrap the whole thing up. There's a battery that needs to disconnect and be charged.
Mhm.
Um, oh, and by the way, there's a business end of this thing that can be dangerous if a lanyard gets caught in it.
Yes.
So, hey,
Yes.
I want to tie this off, what should I do? Well, it's not as simple as just wrapping it with duct tape and twine. There's some
Mhm.
key things you got to think about. The other challenging one is different types of instrumentation. So anything that has an interface that you have to use, and as technology advances, there's more iPads and scanners and things being used, and tying
Mhm.
those things off
Right.
is a challenge. So we're put to the test every day for sure, but it makes the job really fun.
Yeah, and you can imagine even something as simple that we all carry today is the cell phone. I
Yeah.
mean, people are up there, they're gonna be using that cell phone for communication, and for that thing to fall, I mean, you drop this from a couple of stories high, that's gonna be dangerous to somebody.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, it goes into a wide range, and you got your work cut out for you trying to come up with all these things for sure.
Well, the
Um,
cell phone too, Jeff, is a funny one because there's a new cell phone every year, every month it seems like that they come out with, right? At
bigger, yeah,
one time it was like, let's make them as big as we possibly can, and
mhm,
the next year, oh, the trend is small, and
right.
the flip phone was once a
Yeah.
great thing, then they went away from that, and now there's flip phones again.
So as this evolution has gone on, obviously we have our government entity, OSHA, to be involved. And
Mhm.
as OSHA come on board, and do they have a standard for these for this fall protection now or this drop protection?
Well, I'm glad you asked about OSHA. It's one of the more confusing things when it comes to safety managers. Is I think the myth that's out there is that OSHA doesn't say anything about dropped objects, and so we don't really have to do anything, right?
Mm, right.
Um, it, and that's false. OSHA actually mentions both in the general industry standard and the construction standard that uh, you know not pulling out phrases from those standards, but in summary, they essentially say it is the duty of the employer to protect folks from dropped objects. It's a
Mhm.
recognized issue, and we keep building things up, and we keep doing things over bystanders and other workers.
Mhm.
And so then it's kind of, but OSHA doesn't tell you what to do necessarily, right? They say you have to do this, but
Right.
they don't necessarily give you a script for how to do it.
Right.
So then safety managers have to lean on, well, what's recognized best practice out there.
Mhm.
So even though OSHA doesn't say tool tethering is required, it's a pretty obvious thing that tethering and tying off your tools, preventing them from falling,
Mhm.
is a better practice than, putting covers and hard hats on people that don't prevent anything from falling. They just hopefully minimize the damage when they do
Right.
fall and hit you.
Right.
And that hard hat, it protects this area right here, right? If it hits you here, you're bent over, it hits you in the back, that doesn't protect
Correct.
you. And don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking the hard hat, because these things do
Very
save
important.
lives and
Mhm.
they need to remain on the job site. But tethering tools is an obvious best practice.
Mhm.
So, and on top of that, we can talk about the ANSI standard here shortly. There is now an ANSI standard that talks about, proper tool tethering equipment to use.
Mhm.
And so the different pieces are in place, if you will, for OSHA to say there's a recognized best practice, there's
Mhm.
an industry standard out there that speaks to this equipment. You know, do the math. It should be an obvious best practice, to help save lives and prevent injuries on the job site.
Right. For sure. And you talk about the tethering. So, go ahead. You mentioned about the ANSI standard. Go ahead, if you would, and explain that to us a little bit.
Yep, for sure. So the ANSI standard, I mean, many people are familiar with ANSI
Mhm.
through the various categories of safety equipment, right? You have ANSI 107 for high vis, you have ANSI Z359 for fall protection, and now as of 2018, you have ANSI 121 for dropped objects equipment. And this was, a safety nerds get excited about this stuff, because this was one of the first ones in a long time, one of the first standards written by ANSI in a long time,
Mhm.
that wasn't just kind of a carbon copy from a standard in Europe or a revision to a previous standard. It
Mhm.
was a blank page of paper that Ergodyne and some of our other peers in the industry got together and said, there is nothing to tell a worker and an employer that duct tape and rope is not a proper dropped
Right.
object system, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody says we require dropped object prevention on our job site, a worker can say, well, okay, I've got this paracord, or I've got this twine, and I've got a roll of electrical tape or duct tape. This is my dropped object prevention plan.
Mhm.
So we
Yeah.
got together, we scripted out a standard, ANSI 121, that covered connection points on tools like this,
Mhm.
lanyards, anchor points, and then also containers like pouches and buckets and things like that,
Mhm.
and talked about the proper way to design them, the proper way to test them, and so forth, so on and so forth. And that standard came out in 2018. So now employers, when they write in uh, their proposals that you need dropped objects safety on the job site, if you're a general contractor, they can say, and you must use ANSI rated systems. Then that job knows that they have to take it serious and get
Right.
engineered products instead of makeshift products.
Mhm.
But it's still our biggest competitor out there is duct tape and rope.
Yeah, and that's so true. And I have worked with many people over the years, and I know working in the forest industry.
Hmm.
You've got the gentleman that would he's got his fall protection equipment, his spikes, and he's got his rope and everything going up a tree,
Yep.
and he's taken with him a very small chainsaw.
Right. Yep.
So that he can start limbing as he goes.
Yeah.
Now that chainsaw, you'll see, and I've seen it. I have, just as you mentioned, I've seen it used with some rope and duct tape, actually holding that to his harness so
Yeah,
that if you were to drop it, it's but again, is that properly safe? No. It in most cases it probably works okay, but is it truly safe using duct tape and a piece of rope?
right.
No, it's not. And
Exactly.
that's great that you guys have now you mentioned that Ergodyne was involved in the actual writing of this ANSI standard 121?
Yeah, yeah,
That's
we chaired the
fantastic.
committee, along with a couple of our counterparts in the industry, a
Mhm.
great group of individuals, that worked together, and we had from the blank piece of paper to the release of the standard, worked together, and the whole process kind of happened under 2 years, which was fantastic. I mean, it's funny when bunch of competitors get together, and that's what I love about the safety industry is that even though we're competitors, we all have the same
Mhm.
overall goal is to bring
Right.
workers home safe to their families. So when you put the price lists away and all the competitive talk, and you get together as a group and talk things out with one goal in mind, you can sure get a lot done. So yeah, it was a great group, and we'll be meeting again here very soon, and hopefully talking about the next revision in not too long.
Alright. Now so yeah, it would definitely have to be revised
Hmm.
as you write this, and then it gets out there and you get using it. You're gonna find along the way, "Oh, we need to add this, or we need to modify this portion of it a little bit." Now, did you have to go through, did that had to be presented to the government to be approved? Is that how that works?
No, not necessarily. Not with ANSI.
Okay.
No, we worked through the International Safety Equipment Association,
Mhm.
ISEA, which is a phenomenal group, to follow. They do wonders for the industry, and they're kind of the group in the industry that helps uh, chair these
Okay.
standards,
Mhm.
for lack of a
Right.
better term, I guess.
Right.
So once we get together as a group and we realize that's the appropriate way to do it, then it kind of goes off to those people for review, but not necessarily a government entity, if
I
you
see.
will, because ANSI by itself isn't a regulated standard,
I
but
see.
it's recognized by OSHA and many others to be kind of the best practice, even though it's not necessarily a regulated
Mhm.
standard. OSHA can point to an ANSI standard or the like, and say this is best practice, and therefore it kind of becomes regulated. But in this case, that hasn't quite happened yet.
Right. So, and you guys would have to go, obviously, at that point, go into some R&D and find out, to start to develop these products. I mean, that process has to be pretty painstaking as well.
Yeah, I think for some, we pride ourselves we prided ourselves on kind of testing pretty stringently before the standard even came out,
Mhm.
our products. So we did need to revise a few things, but most of our stuff, when we took it through the testing and that, it did pass. But you still do have to do it. Like you said, it can be painful. But I'll tell you what, the probably the most painful thing is just all the documentation and the labeling and stuff that
Mhm.
that has to go on it, because you have to do all that,
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
work that through, manage your inventory and all that stuff. But
Right.
yeah, no, so lucky for us, we were in pretty good shape when it came to product design. It was just all the documentation and labeling, and everything that comes with this stuff.
And that's great that you guys were forward thinking on this and getting ahead of
Mhm.
it because you saw this, and I'm sure some others did as well, which made you able to collaborate with other companies in the industry. But you were forward thinking on this to look for it. Look, here's an issue. Here's a problem that is out there.
Yep.
What can we do to help, this problem and prevent this from happening? So
Right.
that's
We'll say on that note, Jeff, the innovation is happening so fast. Kind of circling back to one of our beginning topics was we're coming up with new stuff constantly every day. So to have products try to meet the standard while continuously coming up with new products, for new tools and new things, it really, the R&D is just really heavy. And thankfully, I work for an organization that invests heavily into that.
that's great.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, do you have some things that you could show us that have to do with this, the tethering and whatnot? Do you have a few of the products there you could show us?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is the show and tell part. So I
All right,
remember this
good.
back from elementary school, right? On Fridays, you'd bring your
Yeah.
show and tell, and you were so
Mhm.
excited to show everybody. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll show you a couple of examples. I mentioned that system part of it, right? You have the connection points both on the tool and the anchor.
Hmm.
And then you have the lanyard that kind of connects everything in between. And then there's a category that the standard calls containers,
Hmm.
either stationary or portable containers that store things and have anchor points built onto it and stuff. So I'll show you a couple. Some of them have been around for a little while. Others have been more recent, but I mentioned that tape measure. Right, this is one of our most popular solutions, and it's called our tape measure trap. We call them traps, and that is trapping a connection point onto a tool. So you have a little harness that simply opens up. You fold onto a tape measure. It has a little D-ring to connect your lanyard to on the back, and it still gives you all the functionality of your lock, your tape, and a belt clip on the back, so it doesn't hinder your work or using the tape measure at all. Second one, then moving to power tools, is our bracket for a grinder. So this was another one I showed. The problem is you've got this business end, as I mentioned. So if you get your lanyard that kind of drapes or falls into the business end of a grinder, it's going to be a bad day. So we've created a bracket that actually bolts on with a set of hardware to whatever side you're not
Oh,
using
the
for the
opposite of
handle.
the handle.
Yeah, and it's kind of directionally positioned to push the connection and the lanyard back away from the business end, so that it's unlikely to fall into the rotating grinder. So these are some of the newer one-step innovations. Your classic, I was dogging duct tape and rope before, but there is some engineered tape that we just tried to make easy for people to use, because they were used to doing tape anyway. So we take the roll of duct tape out of their hands and say, here, use this stuff because it's self-fusing. There's no adhesive in it,
Oh,
and it captures a connection point. And guess what? We've tested it to a safety factor, as a matter of fact. So you can feel confident in tying off to this. So that's a few different connections, tool connections, if you will. And then you can move into lanyards. And lanyards, you have your classic example of your
okay.
your your tool tether, right? Your leash,
Right.
if you will. And these have been around for a long time. And it's basically a tested, glorified piece of rope, right?
Mhm.
Well, what we've discovered, I mentioned that at the beginning, that the person's on the opposite end of the system.
Right.
So they're now the anchor point. So
Mhm.
if I'm at height and I drop this grinder, the force of that grinder falling and hitting the end of this lanyard is going
Mhm.
to travel through the lanyard to my belt.
Right.
And if I'm on a ladder, if I'm on a leading edge, there's a high chance, if this thing is heavy, that it's going to act as an anchor and just pull me right down with it.
Right. Or upset your balance at least anyway.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So what we've done now with our FX squids is built-in shock absorbing capabilities.
That's
So
awesome.
this has some of the best shock absorption of any tool lanyard, and
Mhm.
people recognize shock absorbing lanyards from fall protection.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Mhm.
yeah, so this will dampen that force and create a less of a pull on the worker.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Now you mentioned the belt. Now, is there a special belt that somebody would have for that also that's not part of his normal harness?
There's special belts out there. There's getting into the container
Mhm.
portion. There's you can utilize your tool belt, but get a tool pouch that's rated, labeled, and everything to
Mhm.
put onto your tool belt, or that belt that has connection points on the
Ah,
outside
there you go.
and
Yep.
connection points on the inside. So then you can tie your lanyard off to this. It also has an opening that stays open and a hinge that shuts it
Oh, wow.
with a zipper, so you can keep everything contained.
Wow.
Uh, and one thing that's often overlooked with these is trying to lessen the weight on the worker.
Yep.
So if they're going up or coming down and they want to offload 20, 25 pounds, whatever's in here, and put it into a hoist bucket and pull it up,
Mhm.
they can remove it from their belt or their fall protection without removing their belt or fall protection.
Nice. See, that's very important. Yeah,
Yeah,
because you don't wanna
absolutely.
re take that belt off because 'cause you've got that's important piece of what you're wearing for your own protection.
Bingo. Yep, absolutely.
So Nate, you've shown us quite a variety of the different things that you have, and I'm going to put up the website. So this can all be found at ergodyne.com.
Absolutely. Check out our website, relatively new website that's fully optimized, easy to find everything, and all of our solutions, both from dropped object prevention and our other 12 safety categories. Everything that's on the wall and beyond can be found on our website. So check us out and give us a follow on our social media as well.
Okay, and where is that? You have is that Twitter and Facebook and all?
Yep, everything, all of the above. Yep, just type in Ergodyne or at Ergodyne Workday or one of the two. It's a fun follow too. We're not just throwing product in your face. We're telling worker stories. We're showing what's out there and everything.
Mhm.
So yeah, definitely give us a follow.
All right, that's fantastic. All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up for today, and that is our show for the dropped objects prevention that has been we've had here with Nate Bohmbach from Ergodyne Corporation. And don't forget, you can check us out at premiersafety.com, the smart choice for your safety solutions. Again, thank you, Nate. Appreciate you coming on here with us today.
Well, Jeff, thank you and Premier Safety for having me. Really appreciate it.
Have a good day, folks, and be safe out there.